Democratic Senator Joe Manchin blasted lawmakers for dragging their feet on debt ceiling negotiations after Fitch downgraded the United States credit rating. He called out the federal government too, saying this, quote, represents a historic failure of leadership by both political parties and the executive branch. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen slammed the rating agency's move. Let's listen.
Fitch's decision is puzzling in light of the economic strength we see in the United States. I strongly disagree with Fitch's decision, and I believe it is entirely unwarranted. Its flawed assessment is based on outdated data and fails to reflect improvements across a range of indicators, including those related to governance, that we've seen over the past 2.5 years.
Joining us to discuss this further is Rohan Grey, the research director of the Digital Fiat Currency Institute. Welcome, Rohan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So what do you make of this downgrade in the credit rating? It's my understanding that when you don't make good on your financial obligations, that is when your credit gets downgraded. Has the U.S. ever not made good on their U.S. Treasury obligations, Rohan?
No, not at all. There's been a few very minor technical hiccups over the years, but there's never been a situation where the United States has just not paid people things that it owed them. There's a sense in which this is a kind of first time as tragedy, second time as fast, because we actually went through this back in the early 2010s when Standard & Poor's tried to downgrade the United States in light of the debt ceiling fiasco at the time with President Obama. And the irony is that after that, people flocked into U.S. Treasuries. That is to say, people reacted to that news by going and buying the very thing that people were saying was now more unsafe. So I think this is a big nothing burger. I think the credit ratings agencies are essentially wading far beyond their expertise, which is assessing whether or not private actors can repay their debts, and have waded into essentially commentary on modern politics. It's almost like President Obama having a list of the best songs of the summer. That's his opinion, man, but it doesn't mean anything, in the broader sense.
Should we make anything of the, quote, debt burden that Fitch mentioned as being a reason for the downgrade in credit? Does the debt that the United States has have anything to do with their ability to make good on U.S. Treasury bonds?
No, in fact, the U.S. Treasury bonds are the debt, and people like holding U.S. debt as an investment asset. The United States can print money, right? It has an infinity sign. Warren Buffett said it should have 4 A's because it can never run out of money. The only question we're now talking about is, will it spend that money? And that's not the same question as can you actually be good for it. So what we are getting away from is the kinds of things that you and I would think of when we think of credit ratings, which is, can we literally afford this? Do we have enough money coming in to cover the outflows if our debt gets too high? Whereas in the case of the United States, the debt itself is actually just another asset that people hold. The interest rate that we pay on that is set by the Fed to serve broader policy interests, and we can always print more when we need to. So this isn't an issue of default. This is an issue of Fitch saying they don't like current American politics and using the debt concern as a way to express that.
So like you, I would not point to the debt as a reason for a credit downgrade at all. They did mention economic deterioration, which I find to be quite fascinating. Are there any, fiscal or monetary policies you would point to that indicate economic deterioration in the U.S.?
I mean, the increasingly rapid heat death of the planet, I would call economic dislocation. But I think when it comes to the kinds of things that they're talking about, not really. The fact that we had a large number of big spending bills recently hasn't taken away our firepower to do things in the future. In fact, it's done the opposite. It's shown us that in big crises, we can actually respond robustly in a way that helps people. And what we're dealing with now is the sort of after effects of an inflationary bump that came with COVID and came with a supply shock, but it's going down and other economic indicators are going up. So, Secretary Yellen was correct to say it's weird to be coming out now and saying this when things are actually looking better. But I think she also ignores the deeper point, which is these ratings are a category error. This is an actor used to giving ratings to one group of people that's now trying to apply it somewhere else. And most of the public can't really see that those two things are not in the same category. The United States and Apple are not in the same category when it comes to their credit risk. And yet, these ratings agencies are using the same techniques for both.
And members of Congress seem to be using this credit downgrade as more fuel to their fire of this political message of austerity, that we need to cut spending, we need to cut public programs like Social Security, which is still absolutely a conversation. How long do you think this will go on among members of Congress, them using a credit downgrade by Fitch as an excuse and them using the debt as an excuse for cutting public spending?
Well, after the 2008-2009 crisis, we had an unfortunate, very quick pivot to austerity and deficit and debt reduction. If you remember, we had the bipartisan deficit reduction commission. We had President Obama saying we'd run out of money. I think we have managed to avoid that kind of immediate whiplash following the COVID pandemic and the large spending there. But there is going to be attempts by people to really rein back the lessons that we've learned over the last couple of years and to try to show that, in fact, we cannot help average people in those moments and that this was all a big mistake. And one of the ways they're going to do that is fear-mongering about the debt, precisely because it never actually has to manifest. But every time it grows, it feels more and more intimidating. It feels more and more like a problem that we eventually just have to address. And so, as you say, it's going to be the kind of people that already have these beliefs and are just looking for a pretext to talk about them.
Yeah, I think the average voter or just average person living in the United States as a member of our economic and financial and monetary system kind of has a right to know how public spending works, how fiscal policy is run, how monetary policy is run. I'm of the thinking we should teach economics in K through 12 and teach on all of these subjects. Unfortunately, that's not the reality that we live in, but a lot of folks don't understand public spending. And it's dangerous when we have people like President Obama saying, you know, what we've done is take out a credit card with the Bank of China and our children are inheriting the debt. What would you say to people who are terrified about this kind of, financial irresponsibility, applying the same logic of their personal credit accounts to the U.S. government?
Yeah, I'd say a couple of things. First of all, as CEO of JP Morgan, Jamie Dimon, said the other day, it doesn't matter what the credit ratings agencies think, it matters what the markets think. And the markets agree with the central bank when the central bank says it wants to set interest rates at a certain place, because you don't bet against the central bank, which is a lesson that investors in Japan have learned over the last decade. So it doesn't really matter that Fitch does this. The reason these kinds of credit ratings agencies are important in the first place is because there are investor rules that say you need to get a certain credit grade on an asset in order to hold it in a certain part of your portfolio. So if you want to buy a risky asset and it gets a B rating from Fitch or something, that's important. In the context of government debt, it's a lot less relevant. But I think the other big point that I would say to people is we need to stop thinking of this as an extension of ourselves. If you think of a football game, there's one person on the field, right, that has a different role than everybody else. That's the referee. They have a different role. They shouldn't be picking up the ball and trying to score touchdowns. And so when we think of the economy, you and I are citizens or inhabitants of this country, whereas the United States is the kind of rule maker. It sits in a different position. And so we can't apply our logic to it without making mistakes. And specifically when it comes to government debt. You and I, debt is something that we have to pay back that we don't own. In the context of the government, debt is a special form of money. That sounds counterintuitive, but if you ask an investor where they're holding their cash, they will actually think you're talking about treasury debt most of the time. So to get to the point where you can think of treasury debt and money as part of the same category is, I think, the biggest psychological shift. But it comes with recognizing that there are different roles, that we play one role and that the state plays a different role in the monetary system.
Rohan, your perspective on this is so essential right now. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on and break it down.
Thank you very much for having me.
More Rising after this.